Eddie Rogers.
Hey Buckaroos, welcome back to Musicom Academy. Today is something very interesting, very entertaining, and I think very, very inspiring. We're going to talk to one of the Big Eight jocks, just like we've done a whole bunch of times. And it's today that somebody that, I was just thinking about it and looking at, timeline. It's like, I've known this guy for 50 years, which is, that's, shocking to me actually, but, God, we're getting old. But anyway, and it's been a fun 50 years. I definitely have to tell you that. And the person we're talking about is Eddie Rogers. Hey, Eddie.
And how you doing? In fact, I was sitting here looking at both of us on the screen, and when you said we'd known each other for 50 years, I flashed back to that. Then, of course, I went to the years that we worked together as Rogers and Holiday, which was great.
Yeah, we had some fun times. They were interesting times, and we'll get to that. So one of the things with Eddie is that Eddie has had two pretty long careers. Like you've worked, you've been working 33, 22, 55 years. I mean, that's
Something
amazing
like
in
that.
itself. I mean, did I get that math right? I did, right?
No, I think that's it. Yeah. 55 years. And of course, I started when I was 2. So I'm not all that old like you are.
Yeah. So let's start off with radio, and we'll start off with the easy question, and then we'll just go from there and just rack through your life, so to speak, and have some fun doing it. Everybody so far that I've talked to has a totally different way that they got into radio. Ones that I have no idea, like, wow, I didn't even know you could do that. And for you, how did you get into radio?
It was during high school. I was the sports editor of my high school newspaper, okay? And I was in a small market. Of course, that's one of the secrets to getting into radio really early is being in a really small market, right? So there's not a lot of competition for the jobs or between the stations. There were actually 3 stations in this small market, which was suburban to Asheville, North Carolina, in the mountains there of Western North Carolina. And the station that had, I guess, about a 4 share, maybe a 5 share of the 100% listening, asked me if I would come on Saturday mornings and do a report of high school sports, since I was familiar with it being the editor of the high school newspaper. So I was doing that. Unbeknownst to me, the general manager of the radio station that had about a 95% audience or 93% audience, whatever, went to our basketball coach. I think they just knew one another. And I played basketball and baseball for this coach. And the general manager of the station said, do you have somebody, we want to have a high school student come in, do afternoons and weekends. Do you have somebody that we can rely on to show up? Somebody that can catch on to these things. So I went over and started training on the station that had an audience, which was a little daytime station.
Wow, interesting story. Yeah, it's funny, and there's another totally different one. It's fascinating to hear how each person has got into radio. So along the way, you did 5 or 6 years in North Carolina before you hit the big time. One of those, as I recall, you were on TV somewhere in that stretch of 6 years at one of the stations.
Yeah, I was. That was when, for me, at that point in my career, was the big time. I got to go to Asheville, the key of the metro, and I was on AM, FM, and TV. I started with this wacky idea for a radio show I called the Royal Flying Doctor, and the FM part of this simulcast on the AM, FM covered 6 states in the Southeast.
Wow.
They had huge antenna height and grandfathered in with some power on top of this huge antenna height. And in fact, as the Royal Flying Doctor, I had fan clubs in 6 different states. Pretty amazing, right?
Wow.
And it went over really
wait.
well.
How old were you then, would you say?
That I had already been to University of North Carolina, and I had come out. So let's see, that would have been, I was
So
about
you're in your
20.
20s.
I was in my low
So
20s.
Yeah.
Low
Okay. I mean,
20s.
from when you started, I thought, geez, maybe you're like you got fan clubs in 6 states and you're like 17 or something. But okay, got it. Okay, sorry, I
Not
didn't mean
quite,
to,
but
didn't mean to
almost,
interrupt.
almost. Um, so the general manager of the TV station approached the radio manager and said, see if this guy, how he looks on camera down here. Well, I didn't look great, but I didn't look horrible. And I had black hair, which was kind of cool at the time. I haven't had that in a long time. So they recorded a thing where, much like Superman of back in the day, I flew in over the aerial view of Asheville, North Carolina, with a cape and landed in front of the TV station. Actually, I jumped off a ladder into the shot, right? But I did
Yeah.
a Royal Flying Doctor dance party show on Channel 13 in Asheville. And
Wow.
interestingly, the radio market was, if I recall, the 115th largest radio market. But for TV, it was the 43rd largest market because it was
Wow.
Asheville, Greenville, Spartanburg, which was a decent sized market. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I did a dance party show where we had high school students come in from 3 or 4 different states from various high schools and would dance. And I'd play a new song, an old song, and some current songs. And that was about it. Introduced it a la Dick Clark style. I was basically an MC, and unlike Dick Clark, I didn't have a podium looking set up in the studio. I was standing there. And back in the day, of course, I wore a suit and tie, even
Right.
for a high school audience kind of show. So, yeah, that's how that worked.
Actually, might as well start talking about it now. You went from there to Weem in Washington D.C. and Billy Gable was there. Because you work with Bill there, and of course at CK. And Billy used to be really good at doing those type of dance things too. Because he did it at I'm trying to think of the place, the Grog Shop in Detroit, and tons of people
Oh,
came
yeah.
out. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I was just wondering, did you pick up that skill, somewhere along the way, like in Wien? Did you do a lot of those type of in Washington, those
Not really in
dancing?
DC, but I guess I was always able to work before a live audience because a lot of folks on radio, as you know, when you come from behind the mic and out of the studio, they're kind of panicked.
Yeah,
But I was
yeah,
always
that would be me. I didn't like that.
well,
Yeah,
I don't think quite panicked, but I was always good with a live audience and speaking publicly. But it was later on when disco came in the what was that late 70s, I guess, and that's where I learned how to mix New York style beat on beat mixing, where you blended all the songs together and so
yeah.
on. And of course, came up with all my gear if I were not working at a bar that had their own. So that's kind of how I got into the dance party kind of business.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Interesting. Well, we'll definitely get to that a little bit. So, how did you? Sorry, I know I jumped ahead, but how did you get the Weem? Did you mail a tape? Somebody hear you?
I had done something that I have told my kids and anybody about radio or any other business, whether it's the automobile business, don't quit your job before you get another one.
Oh, for
However,
sure. Oh man, yeah.
however, at my young age, let's see, that would have been about again 22, I believe. Um, I got mad and quit a job. I was program director in Afternoon Drive, and they were doing some illegal things, and I just couldn't get my head around breaking FCC rules and being a
Ooh,
program director. So I
yeah,
just resigned and didn't have a job. Some of my folks from the radio station said, "Come on over and have lunch and let's talk." So we met at one of the great lunch spots around Asheville, North Carolina, the Burger King, and that was on Patton Avenue. And somebody said, "Look, I brought the broadcasting magazine here," which again, back in the day, that's where job openings appeared. There was no radio and
yeah.
records or
Nothing
Bob
online.
Hamilton.
No
Yeah,
net. Yeah.
Bill. Yeah. So they said, "I see here in Broadcasting Magazine that Weem in Arlington, Virginia has an opening. You should check that out." And I said, "Well, Weem in Arlington, Virginia is like the number one music station in Washington, D.C., which is the
Hmm.
seventh market in the country. I said, I'm looking more like North Augusta, South Carolina. I'm looking at Raleigh. I'm looking at Charlotte, may be a little big. Yeah, so, but as I drove home from the Burger King, I thought, what can this person, general manager, PD, say? But no. And who would even know, right? If he
Yeah.
laughed at every moment of my tape and said never, but who would know? So I sent the tape and resume, and it seemed like, well, it was less than a week, even with snail mail of the day, that I got a call from the general manager, and I have to impersonate him. Bill Gable and I used to do it a lot. Annie, how'd you like to come to the nation's capital? So that was my call from the general manager of the top music station in the seventh market. And I went. Little did I know he had planned on my doing the morning show because
Wow.
somebody,
There's a jump.
well, it very quite a jump, right? From
Oh,
Asheville, North
wow.
Carolina, radio, whatever, 112th, 113th market to the seventh. Well, he didn't want it to go to my head, so he didn't want to tell me that's what he had in mind. But I was supposed to replace Paul Christie. I don't know if you knew Paul with his years in Detroit and Chicago and
Oh,
all,
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
but
Yeah. Great guy.
yeah,
Yeah.
he was doing mornings there, and
Oh, wow.
he didn't want to have to pay me. He wanted to pay me Asheville money rather than DC morning money.
Right.
So
Wow. Some things never change.
we've some things never change, but I was happy to get off of. I think I started on the early evening show. I believe it could have been 6 to 10, could have been 7 to midnight. It's been a long time ago, and then they wanted to put me on the morning show. So there was a lot of turnover at that station. You and I have laughed about this because how many years did you do at CK? 17, 18, something like that?
Oh my God, it would be a lot. I got there in 1970, and I left in 1985, maybe somewhere in there. So yeah, and
15 or
I
so
did
years.
2.5 years in New York in between. But yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of years.
Well, I held the all-time jock record for tenure at Weeman, Washington of 3 years. Uh, there was a
It's
lot of
funny.
turnover
Yeah.
because it became a jumping off place for a lot of good air talent to go. Al Brady pops to mind. Tommy
Oh, he
Edwards
was
pops to
great.
mind. Yeah,
Also
Tommy
great.
was doing weekends when I came in to that station. In fact, I drove from North Carolina up to DC, and it was on the weekend. And this Tommy Edwards guy, who is on Weem on the weekends, as soon as I drove into their signal, was so smooth. He had this excellent voice. I thought, oh man, did they get my tape confused with somebody else? It was a little scary to hear somebody that good. But it was a jumping off point for a lot of people. Paul Christie, I mentioned, went to WCFL in Chicago. Um, Steve Raymond, our afternoon guy, also went to WCFL. Tommy Edwards did go to ORFM in New York, which is
Yeah,
the
I worked with
stop
him
that
there.
you
Yeah.
made.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I ended up being there longer than any other air jock. So, three
Wow, yeah,
years,
and Tommy did WLS too for many, many, many years. I
many
used to
years.
love listening to Al Brady on ORFM. I didn't work
Yeah.
with him there, but I was still, I don't even know if I was in radio at that time. Well, I guess I must have been. But yeah, Al Brady was awesome too. I mean, I don't know how he was, at Weem, but when I heard him in New York, man, he was amazing. He was a great jock too. Actually, a lot of great jocks come out of there. Them, you, Billy, and also an amazing, perhaps the best period engineer was there. That we
Yeah.
also worked with at CKLW, Ed Budabaugh. I mean,
Yeah.
Ed had zero peers. I don't think. I really don't.
I
Uh,
agree.
he was the chief engineer at Weem. We keep saying Weem. It was WEAM, so it spelled the word Weem.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. Did Ed do those magical things and invent weird stuff for that station too? Like he
He
did at
he
CK?
did, as you know from working with him at CK. Um, he was a fun guy to be around.
Oh yeah.
He was a great engineer, extremely smart, very creative, and something that he did at Weem. We were a 5,000 watt station, and if any of the YouTube viewers here are familiar with directional antennas and things like that, where you have to protect the signal of larger stations and so on, we had a highly directional pattern at that station, and 5,000 watts. Ed became aware of or figured out that if you got a 10,000 watt transmitter for your 5,000 watt station and for a non-technical person detuned it to be legal at 5,000 watts output, yet the positive peaks or the loudness of the AM radio station would be incredibly loud compared to anybody else across the dial because you were using a 10,000 watt transmitter. That's an Ed Buterbaugh thing.
How
He
would you
came up
even?
with
How
that.
would you eat that? Yeah. How would you even? How would that even cross somebody's mind? That's awesome.
Yeah,
That he would even
he was
figure that out.
great. The quality of our studio, it was excellent. Ed, as you know, was a volunteer fireman as well. He was
Hmm.
big into the community there outside our station in DC. In
Yeah.
fact, I was very happy when I did get to CK. Somebody asked if we'd mentioned Billy and Ed, asked me if are there any more guys like you in DC? And I said, well, actually, when I was doing mornings, we had a guy doing afternoon. His name was Billy Campbell. He came from Allentown, Pennsylvania. They
Yeah.
like to hire guys like out of Asheville and Allentown. He was Billy Campbell, did afternoons, and he went to WHBQ in Memphis as Bill Gable. And I said, so I think Bill Gable would be great for us to bring in here to CKLW. And that's one of the things that made me happiest about being there was to get my friend Billy with us at CK, which worked out awesome. And I said, well, I think it was a separate conversation, if I recall, about an engineer. Do you know anybody? And I said, well, actually, the guy's the chief engineer in Washington, D.C., is amazing. You just need to talk with him and find out
Hmm.
some of the things that he's done. And of course, that was Ed Buterbaugh, as we just mentioned, brought him to CKLW, and his fame even grew larger as more and more people learned about him.
Yeah, Ed invented so many things for radio that are just standard now, but that wasn't even a glint in anybody's remote eye back then when he's coming up with those mad scientist things. He'd come in with these little, well, you would say, Ed would come in with these little boxes and there's wires sticking out all over them. Hey, I'm going to go put this in the line tonight. And, and he'd, in the middle of the night, he'd put one in the next day. It's like the station is like super loud, sometimes
Yeah,
distorted loud, and then he'd turn it down. Different
tweak
stuff.
it a
You know
little.
what? Ed had a really interesting thing. We were talking about that one time, and you probably love this. I said, well, how do you actually tune the station, Ed? Because he goes, well, you can't do it very long because your ear starts getting messed up, and you're out at the transmitter, and it's all cement and stuff, and it's it's not the ideal listening environment. So this is what he said. This is what I do. I turn it up to the point where I know it's distorting, so it's not good, and then I start turning it down. And at the moment when the distortion sort of disappears, or I think it sounds good, I stop right there. That's my starting point, and then I leave the building and come back and try to mess with it the next night because I know I'm not over the line. Where I think most people would go the other direction, and and I thought, wow, that's a brilliant way of doing it. It
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. He was terrific, and actually, I must say, may he and our friend Bill Gable both rest in peace, because we did lose both of them sooner than we should have. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
100%. Yeah, yeah. Billy was one of my super close friends. Yeah, it's one of those things where you're like, hey, I want to call Bill. Oh, I can't call Bill.
right,
Yeah.
yeah, I understood
That's
that.
that's what sucks about getting old. Yeah, yeah. So you're at Weem, and after Weem comes the Big Eight. How did that occur? Like you get a call, you again mail tape, get fired.
Well,
What something must have happened.
that story was a little different too, because I didn't send a tape and resume. And what happened in Washington, D.C., there was an RKO General owned station, WGMS. And RKO General was, of course, a former owner of CKLW
For
and
sure.
owned a
Yeah.
lot of other famous stations like KFRC, San Francisco, KHJ, Los Angeles. But I got a call from Paul Drew. And I, of course, had heard his name as a pretty famous programmer already because he'd been at
Hmm.
CKLW, possibly, I'm not sure the timeline, but possibly already at KHJ with Bill Drake format.
Yeah.
Um, he said, we're going to change the format of WGMS from classical to top 40 to hit music. And I'd like for you to come over. And had lunch with him. And I
Hmm.
know he had hired another jock from DC that I thought was really great from the R&B, the rhythm and blues station, WOL, the Mighty Burner. I think his name, it could have been Bobby Bennett, but it's been a long time. So I thought, wow, if he thinks Bobby and I are going to be the anchors of this station, this will be great. Okay.
Hmm.
I'm excited. Haven't resigned or anything because we haven't formalized the deal, but I got a
And you
call from
learned that
Paul.
lesson. And you
Well,
learned that lesson.
well, yes, I did compared to the other situation in North Carolina, which actually worked out well, right? But got a call from Paul. He said the Federal Communications Commission is going to continue to to protect the classical music stations in major markets. They're not going to allow RKO General to change the format of WGMS. So I'm really bummed out. I'm really sorry. He may have said, I hope you haven't resigned yet. And I said, no, I haven't. And so we had to call that off. And he said, well, maybe another time, another day. Out of the blue, I get a phone call from Alden Deal. In fact, because Paul had my home number, he shared that with Alden, who was the program director of CKLW, as you know, at that time, because you were already there. He called my home number, and my wife called me on the hotline at Weem and said, you have a call, and the guy wants you to return his call today. His name is something like Alden. I said, Alden Deal? And she said, yeah. I said, he's the program director of CKLW in Detroit. And she said, well, that's who it is. So you need to call him today. So that's kind of how that happened. Um, well, yeah. And the timing couldn't have been better because when you've been at Weem 3 years, this is in Tommy Edwards' book, by the way. Tommy Edwards, who we mentioned earlier, has a book out, and he talks about how that general manager at Weem had this habit of firing the entire staff all at once, fired everybody, and before the show that was currently on the air ended, he would call the guy who followed. Let's say he did it in the middle of the day. He would call the afternoon jock and say, I'm hiring you back. So get in here and do your show. So he would always hire us back. But 3 years of going through that multiple times, I was really ready to go to CKLW or
Wow.
somewhere else.
What a
Yeah.
crazy GM. Holy moly.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
the stories could go on way beyond the time that we're thinking about today, just about this one guy. So yeah, and you just reminded me of starting CK, and I must have told you this story when you and I were partners on the morning show about my blind, I call it, my ignorant entrance going to CKLW to cross the border into Windsor, Ontario, which is, of course, where CKLW is
Yeah.
licensed, right?
Remind me.
Uh,
Yeah.
okay, here's the story. CK had hired a moving company to move my household goods from the DC area to Detroit, and they had a room set up for me at the Holiday Inn in Windsor on Riverside Drive. Nobody mentioned about coming across the border. I'd never done that. I'd never been to Canada. So what I had to do was load all the things in my vehicle that the movers wouldn't take. Some of you may know what those things are: paint, plants, house plants,
Hmm.
weapons, firearms, ammunition. So I loaded those things into my car, and it was the thing that several of us at Weem had of driving big vehicles at the time. So here I roll up to the border, coming out of Detroit, going into Windsor, and I've got this big vehicle that has to bend around the corner. It's so big. I had very long black hair.
You had really long hair. Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
really long hair at the time. I had red, white, and blue striped bell bottom jeans on at the time,
I
and
remember those. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, of course, I rolled up to the border, and they're always so nice. It seems on the Canadian side, not necessarily getting back into the U.S., but that's another story. But so, what brings you to Canada? And I said, "Oh, I have a job over here." And of course, that sends off red flags. And in the
For sure.
meantime, he's glancing into the back seat where I have not a lot of guns, but a shotgun and a couple of rifles and ammunition in the floor of the back seat there. And on top of it is a 6-foot philodendron plant. And anybody that's crossed the border knows. Why don't you pull right over there and let us talk to you a little bit more? It took me 4 hours to get into the country that day. I had to become a landed immigrant. And they let me take the firearms and ammunition, but I had to leave all my houseplants there at the border. Would not be the case today, right?
Oh
But
my God. No, 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 no.
back in the early 70s, that's how I got into Canada to work at CKLW.
Yeah, things were so much different back then. The whole world
Yes,
was
they
so much
were.
different back then. Yeah, just definitely more calm. So you're at CKLW, and your first show, second show, third show, the whole process of, oh my God, I'm here. You scared? You're like, okay, I can handle this, no problem, whatever. What's running through your head?
Well, it's a little nerve wracking, and I'm a little hyper anyway. I get a little pumped up. So at the time, CKLW had a thing where you would practice in a practice studio. I assume that you did something like that as well.
Oh, everybody
With
did. Yeah, that was
yeah,
100%. Yeah.
I was doing my first real on air rehearsal. It was a Sunday night, probably 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and, where the listenership is probably at its lowest. So I'm a little nervous anyway. And we didn't have any hit line answering folks at that time on Sunday night. So the jock is answering their own request line. So, first call I take, by the way, the first song I played was "Slipping into Darkness" by War. I'll never forget that. It had a 4-second intro. 4-second intro. I figured I was safe with that. But
Yeah.
I took the first call. It was from Brooklyn, New York. My heart goes a little faster. Oh my gosh, they're listening in Brooklyn, New York. And next call I get is from one of the Dakotas that I don't remember. Same thing. The next call I get is not from Detroit or Windsor or even Cleveland or Toledo that we covered so well. It was from Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And if I were not nervous already, that sent me over the top to think of that signal that we had at
Yeah.
CKLW. So yeah, that was my first night on the air.
Wow, the baptism by fire. Yeah, that was a big
That's
signal.
right.
That was that. I remember that first night. The same similar thing happened to me, not that far away. Although, and I was getting. I remember a call that really stuck out to me. I had gotten one from. I can't think of the city. With the arch and state in the middle of the country. I can't think of
St.
the.
Louis.
Yes, and I'm going like St. Louis, but it was a suburb of St. Louis, and they kept saying the suburb, and I'm looking for it, there were the big boards, with a whole bunch of names on them of all the suburbs of Detroit and everything around, and I'm trying to match it up because I'm new. I don't know the area real well, and I can't find it. And I go, so what part of Detroit is that from? It's like, is that north, south, east, west? He goes, no, I'm calling you from St. Louis. And I was like, what? Like,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's similar. Yeah, probably everybody went through that experience
Yeah.
being there,
And
which is pretty
gr-
cool.
yeah, great for me. My mother could hear me in Western North Carolina when I did afternoon drive at CKLW, and the smaller stations between us in Detroit and Western North Carolina would sign off or change their pattern to protect us. And she could listen to the last hour or so of my show, depending on the time of year. And that was pretty special, pretty special.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So you're at sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say the the things about being able to bring my friend Bill Gable and my friend Ed Buterbaugh out of DC into CKLW were just the really great things for me, and probably those two things and my fun 4 hours of getting into Canada the first time were kind of the highlights at CKLW. Of course, as we all did, we saw national ratings. You're probably familiar with those. I think ABC put together the arbitrons from all over the country till it became a national ranking, and depending on the day part, we were either number 3 or number 2 in North America at
Yeah. Yeah.
CKLW. So it was a pretty
Yeah.
special place to work. That kind of set me up to never have to do tapes and resumes again. And once you're on a station like that, you don't have to send out tapes and resumes. And there came a time when a program director who was putting a new station on in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, called me at the radio station and said, "Hey, man, it's Buzz Bennett, man." And it was Buzzy Bennett, who, of course, was one of the most famous programmers in North American radio. And he had heard me talk up the intro. I'm embarrassed that I really did this. Must have been a minute or minute and a half to the live version of Cherry Cherry by Neil Diamond, which we were playing at CK. And the liner notes were beautiful. It was describing the crowd, and suddenly the heavy doors rolled back. Well, I read that and built up and hit the vocal on that minute and a half, Cherry Cherry, and he had been listening. So his message to me was, look, anybody that's willing to do something that wacky is going to fit in on the station I'm putting together in Pittsburgh. I said, I'm on one of the greatest radio stations ever. And I'm doing Afternoon Drive, and we have an audience. It's working, so I'm going to have to pass. And in fact, I even told him, I said, my wife is expecting a baby, so I'm going to have to pass for multiple personal and professional reasons. As radio will be, CKLW decided to make a change in my day part. Small world. My friend Billy Gable came back from KHJ Los Angeles to do my afternoon show. I didn't get upset at Billy. He didn't have nothing to do with that. I got on the phone. I called Pittsburgh and said, is the offer still good? And I moved to Pittsburgh and did Afternoon Drive at 13Q, which was a pretty famous station in its own right, and became program director there as well.
That was a very legendary radio station at the time. Partially probably because of what the station did came on, had really good numbers in Pittsburgh, and also because of Buzzy, and because the station was doing Buzzy's thing. But Buzzy, like most people would not know, if you're younger now and you're watching the channel and you're learning and stuff, Buzz Bennett, like who's that? I don't know. Although Broadway Bill Lee was mentioning Buzz Bennett as his hero, also, which was cool for the one that I did with Broadway Bill. Buzzy was a crazy mad scientist genius when it came to radio. He came up with a lot of different things that probably most people at the time would be like, "Really? Are you nuts?" And he does them, and bam, through the roof. And you go like, "Well, evidently not so much." And
the through the roof, as you know, the station that had been number one, the music station in Pittsburgh, was KQV, that was owned by ABC, and it was one rating period. 13Q knocked the station that had been on for years and years and years out of the top spot, doing a lot of unusual things, a lot of really unusual things. And I'll not bore everybody with a lot of those, but one of the things that has been written about a lot is we sped up the music slightly. And we sped up the music. And that was a Buzzy's thing. And then if for listeners that would tune across from us to, let's say, KQV, they would sound a little sluggish. It didn't register that their song is playing slower or 13Q is playing faster. It's just that we sounded more energetic and brighter. That's the sort of thing that he did, and we expanded on that, and we did a lot of things with music that kind of led the way. I remember the music director and I, Dennis Waters, had both worked in DC at the same time, and the song "Changes" by David Bowie had done
Hmm.
okay there. We both played it, although we were on different stations in DC. And we were trying to put together our playlist for the week. And one of us said, do you remember Changes by David Bowie? And I said, of course. Or he said, of course. And we decided probably 3 years later to pull Changes off that Bowie album and play it as a current song on 13Q. We did give RCA the heads up of what we're going to do. And of course, they screamed and yelled and swore at us and called us names because they had to press 45s, singles of one of their old songs from their old catalog of Dave Bowie. But then they loved
Hmm.
us because it really, the song took off nationally and became maybe, I guess, one of his biggest hits. And we did a lot of things like that at 13Q, which are a lot of fun. When I was the program director, we were going to try to goose up Jack Armstrong's 6 to 10 p.m. ratings. And we were trying to come
Wait,
up with
wait, 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 wait. You got to explain to people again. There's younger people who are watching this thing. Typically, explain Jack Armstrong, because Jack Armstrong was a one of a kind for sure, and also legendary guy. So explain Jack, and then if you don't remember,
yeah.
I'll prompt you to go back into the
Okay.
story. Yeah,
I don't know if it's possible to explain him because he was unique, and may he rest in peace as well, who left us
yeah.
before he should. But the legend of all legends of nighttime disc jockeys, one of the most imitated of the nighttime disc jockeys in North American radio of the 70s. He was on I want to say WKYC in Cleveland, WKBW in Buffalo, both 50,000 watt stations. And we had him at 13Q, a very famous radio station out of Pittsburgh. He talked 90 miles an hour. He did characters and talked to himself live. I had him over to
Loud.
dinner at my house once, and he was like that in person. But when he would eat, his fork would crash into his teeth because he was still talking so fast. I mean, he was a wonderful man and an amazing disc jockey. So we wanted to do a special promotion for Jack's early evening show on 13Q. We came up with this promotion we called the Snake Jungle. I talked to Jack and I said, let's do something really outrageous here. I said, are you afraid of what? Are you afraid of spiders, for example? He said, I can't handle spiders. Nothing with spiders. I said, what about water? He said, I'm not a great swimmer. I said, what about snakes? I don't mind snakes at all. Well, the light went off. And to shorten the story, I had my assistant contact National Zoo Supply,
Hey,
whose name we'd gotten from the Pittsburgh Zoo as to where they bought their snakes. And we ordered, I think, 16 or 17 pythons and boa constrictors, that some of them were as long as 14 or 15 feet. And we put them in this downtown Pittsburgh department store window with nice art design of the jungle. We had the snake jungle. We raised money for Children's Hospital. And the end of this story is I had left my afternoon drive show and I had to run an errand. Then I came back because he went on the air immediately after me. But as I'm driving downtown to find a parking spot to go to the promotion site, I could tell something was going on. I could tell by Jack's voice. And I started hurrying down to the department store, which, by the way, the police had to block off that entire block from traffic because of all the people that it drew. And then I heard people screaming. I could hear people screaming as I got closer. And as I approached the window, I could see blood splattered all inside the window. Of course, to me, as the program director, things went totally sideways on what we thought was a great promotion for Charity and our nighttime superstar. Um, I got back into the area. Jack is fine. He's got his hand bandaged up. Turns out that Jack thought it would be a little boring to count the 2 barrels contributions to keep Jack in or get Jack out on Friday. So this is probably a Thursday, don't remember for sure. He
Yeah.
decided for this promotion to be as big as it should be, he needed to get bitten by a snake. So he worked with the snake handlers. We did have snake handlers out of sight in the window with their little snake hooks or whatever they're called, managing this from the Pittsburgh Zoo. And he worked with them to pick a non-poisonous. They said, what we'll do, we'll bring in a king snake, and it'll strike at anything. It'll be harmless to you. It'll be pretty scary because it's going to cut your hand. So what was happening when I heard him hesitating, he was apparently doing everything he could to get that king snake to bite him. It would not strike. So Jack is pointing at one of these, I think it is a reticulate python, big, beautiful stripe, huge snake. He's telling them to bring it over. And of course, it took one move at that python and it was down, pow, 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 pow on his hand. And that's what splattered the window. And I told him, I said, you know what? I'm going to choke you right here. You're not going to survive my choking you for doing something that risky on our radio station. But that's another example of the kind of guy he was. He would have done anything for his show and the ratings and the radio station. It was the talk of the town, a lot of TV and newspaper coverage and so on.
So after 13Q, you go to WXYZ in Detroit, back in Detroit, an ABC station. Did they hire you as the PD because you had just wiped out one of their ABC stations in Pittsburgh? Is that why they, or did some of the way you got there?
Well, indirectly, that is the case. I was parting ways with Heftel and 13Q. And by the way, he and I worked together again. I worked on one of his stations years later in Cincinnati. And Heftel, that I'm referring to, probably the average person wouldn't know that he was the congressman from the state of Hawaii for many years and the owner
Cecil.
of a number of great radio stations, Cecil Heftel.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he and I came to a contractual agreement, and I left and hooked up with John Rook and Associates. He'd been the program director of WLS in Chicago, and he'd gone out on his own. And he was working deals to either get the RKO General chain at the time or KFI and the FM Coast, KOST in Los Angeles. And he said, if you'll come with me, I'll put you into one of those, depending on which one I get. So I took that on the come. The negotiations for him got bogged down for a long time. And in the interim, I got a call from Rick Sklar at WABC in New York, who I had applied to when I was back in Washington a number of times. And he had actually called me and said, you're not the person to read the Dennison men's clothier commercials on our all-night show. You may remember when they had
Route 9 at the flagship. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. And he said, but you're doing some things that we like to have on ABC, so I'm going to save your material. Well, I was in heaven for a long time. Then I thought, well, he probably told 1,000 people that. But he actually tracked me down after I left 13Q and had beaten their ABC station there so handily, and had hooked up with John Rook. And John did not have his deal come through. And they called me and said, we'd like for you to go into Detroit, do a little first aid on that station. Then we want to bring you to WABC, as we talked about years ago. And that's how I ended up back at WXYZ in Detroit. And I picked the music and did a lot of their promotional work and their imaging voicing and so on. Ended up being at XYZ for 4 years, which was a pretty nice stuff.
And that was pretty much your start of really, I mean, you from 1975, you were pretty much there right till now, other than the stint in Cincinnati, which we'll get to. So after XYZ, by the way, was Purton there, or had he already gone to CKLW?
No, he did the morning show. Purton and Ryan, Tommy Ryan,
Yeah,
and Dick Purton, and we both left when they changed the format of the station. ABC did to sports talk, and he went to CKLW. I went to WDRQ to do afternoons and program director of that FM Top 40, and that's the station that became disco later. And I stayed for the disco format as well. Have made a few other stops, as you indicate.
So after DRQ, you then go to Magic, as I recall, WMJC,
Yes.
the Greater
Yeah.
Media Station. Yeah, what's Jeff and Jer there?
I was at Magic twice, and I'm trying to remember if they were doing mornings at that time or later. Doesn't matter. I did work with them there. I did afternoons and they did mornings, and I got to fill in on their vacations, which they did have quite a lot of vacation time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I worked with Jerry St. James and Jeff Detro. I can't remember his air name, but
Yeah,
anyway,
I don't think he ever said the last name
Jeff
on
and
the
Jer.
thing.
I guess
Yeah, it was always
just
Jeff and Jer. Yeah. Oh my God, they owned San Diego after that. I had great
They
numbers
did.
in Detroit too, but they were monsters in San Diego. Yeah,
Yeah,
big
and
time.
Jerry and I worked together on WDRQ. It's a small world, right? All of us
Wow, I didn't know
work
that.
with each
It's
other
a
again.
very small world. Yeah. It's funny, when we worked together, I had not yet gone to Cincinnati and done that thing too. So, when I was looking at this, I sort of forgot that you had gone to Cincinnati. As soon as I saw, Yes 95, it's like, oh yeah, I remember talking about it in the control room, in between songs, and when we were doing mornings, but I had not gone there. So now when I look at it, since having worked there and all that sort of stuff too, it's like the whole thing feels different now, So
Sure.
after Magic, you get a call to be the PD or some other thing to go to Yes 95 in Cincinnati. How'd that baby work
Actually,
out?
my father in North Carolina became ill, seriously ill, and I asked Magic if I could get out of a contract that I had to go spend some time with my father before he passed. And I temporarily went to Knoxville, Tennessee, WNOX, and I moved there after, here's another well-known name in radio, Bill Bailey, and I did the New Year's Eve broadcast on Magic, a live broadcast. And I got up the next morning and drove to Tennessee. So that was on January 1st. And my father sadly passed away on the 12th of January. So I stayed there again to get them through the rating period and so on, to not bail immediately. And Magic had already filled my position back in Detroit. And I got a call about Heftel putting a station on that was dark. In other words, it was off the air in Cincinnati. And I did end up coming back as the morning man. I came back to do mornings. Shortly afterwards, became program director. And another Cincinnati name, we then hired Jim Scott to do mornings. And I followed him as PD and doing middays. But that was my Cincinnati stop. And I was Ken Rogers in Cincinnati. The general manager gave me the name Ken Rogers because they'd already hired Eddie Coyle from WFIL in Philadelphia to do afternoons, and they didn't want to have two Eddies, and he was there first, so fine. And at the time, you probably remember, I had this big, full gray beard and still pretty longish hair, and I did look a lot like Kenny Rogers, the superstar singer. And as you know, I don't sing at all, but I did kind of take his name, but I was just Ken. So that was Yes 95 in Cincinnati for Heftel.
You're naming, again, if you were somebody's younger, these names aren't probably clicking for you, but these are all legendary people like Jim Scott. He ended up being the morning guy at WLW forever. Big ratings. The whole station did too, but I mean, he's the anchor. He's the morning guy. So, same thing with you're mentioning Jer. Like I didn't realize or forgot or whatever that he had been on DRQ, and then it's Jeff and Jer on Magic, and then it's Jeff and Jer, in San Diego Monsters.
And
It's
they
funny
were
how
in
people.
Chicago. They were in Chicago too on fire.
Really, I
Before,
don't. Well,
that was after, if I recall, it was after Detroit, before San Diego. But San Diego is where they did their long run, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny. Fired. God, it's just an aside. Do you remember when Frank Lee? I mean, you would know Frank. Well, I guess you weren't there then. Frank Lee and we made a jingle package for CKLW when I was the PD. It was our own jingle package. We did it ourselves. We went and got the Johnny Men singers ourselves. Went to Chicago, had them sing there, and blah 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 blah. And I thought, well, okay, we're gonna have a jingle company. So I sold the jingles to Fire in Chicago. Like they were running our jingles and KFRC. And there was one other station which I can't remember. It was a media market station. And then we just gave up because it was like too hard to get all the people when you're trying to sell stuff. You know what I mean? It was like, okay, I'm not a salesperson. But yeah, Fire was one of those stations that were running the jingles. And and then Fire wasn't so much of a fire, just sort of, the fire went out. And that was that. Because it wasn't around for like, I don't know, 3 years maybe, as I recall.
No, it
Not very
wasn't
long.
a long time. That's a highly competitive market, right? Chicago, much
Big
as
time, yeah.
Detroit always was. Yeah. You and I hooked up together when you were the program director at WLTI, Light FM in Detroit, which was at 93.1, which is the frequency of WDRQ that we've mentioned a few times, where
Yeah.
I was afternoons and mornings. And then in another iteration, obviously, as Light FM, Pat and I became Rogers and Holiday, and we just had a lot of fun and did some pretty outstanding radio there until
Yeah,
the station was purchased by Viacom.
yeah, and then I got gunned, and you remained, which was cool. I got gunned, and also the general manager got gunned, and it's maybe the sales manager too. I can't remember if he got let go also, but yeah, that was an interesting purge. It's a really, I mean, you may or may not remember this, that it actually happened, but the president of Viacom came in. This is one of those things that probably would really happens now. So if you're watching this and you're in radio, this would be my advice to you in this situation. Your station, no, really, your station is about to get taken over by another company because it's been purchased. Somebody comes in and they go, "Oh, we love what you're doing. You got great ratings. Everything's good. I can't wait to get in here, and we're going to put some money into the company and all that sort of stuff." My advice would be mail out tapes and start looking for another job immediately, because you have no downside. Because if you get another job, you can then go, "That's great, thanks. I need a new contract right this minute, or I'm out of here if you love me so much." You know, uh, and I need a big severance on this baby just in case, because I don't trust you. Sorry, I love you, you're great, but I don't trust you. That's what I would do now, having gone through this. Do I sound bitter? I'm actually not, but I'm just, it was just one of those things where I always wanted to explain to people what to do in this situation. So this guy is continually, yeah, this is great to both of us, me and Jeff Sleet, who is the manager. And he never mentions that he's taking the PD and the general manager from Memphis. He's going to pick up his station, people there, and bring them to Detroit, because they basically traded radio stations, one FM in Detroit for two stations in Memphis. That was the deal. Like, all he had to do was just say, "Yeah, we want to do that," and it would be like, "Yeah, no problem, bud. I'll just go get another job." But basically, full on lying, and it's like, "What are you doing? Like, what is that?" And I think at the time my wife had another 2 months to go before Whitney's born, and it's what, maybe 2 weeks before Christmas. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, it was crazy. Yeah, yeah, and no severance. You've never worked for us. You'll have to go to your last owner. I don't know if that was legal or not. I was like, okay, whatever. Anyway, I got a job like 3 weeks later. It wasn't a big, super big deal. Because just like you were mentioning earlier, for whatever reason, once you have CKLW on your resume, you don't, that's pretty much the opening door to almost anywhere. Yeah, which was cool for us, at the time. Anyway, I probably maybe should leave that out, but or maybe I'll just leave it
No,
in.
I think that's the story is a good message, and you just gave the message to your people that follow you that are in the business. And how many times have I and you heard, "Oh, we're not going to change anything. Everything's
Oh,
great. We're not changing anything. Just keep doing what you're doing." And then, of course, they come in and make major changes. You're correct with the timing. It was a couple of weeks before Christmas because, if you recall, I had just gotten married. You stood up in my
right.
wedding, and we were on our honeymoon. We got married the Saturday after Thanksgiving, and we're on our honeymoon. I had an answering machine. I said, "Well, with a layover, I'm going to go check my messages." And I think you were the first one. Then here's the rest of our team: our producer, our sports guy, our voice guy, who was a superstar, right? I don't recall that he called me, but and of course I'm wondering. But you said, "I don't think you're out." I don't know, but I don't think you're out. So I did find out later, and I hope you'll leave this in, that when they told you during the conversation, your exit conversation, I'll call it, that
Hmm.
I was going to stay, they asked you, "So what's this guy going to do? Is he going to erase all the carts? Is he going to break up equipment? Or what's he going to do?" And you said something like, "He's going to come in here like the professional he is and just do the show." And
Yeah.
I never forgot that. You and I have been friends a long time, but that's the kind of guy you are, and I appreciated that. And that's what I did. They didn't say anything to me. I think I went on the air at 5:30. Does that sound right? Did we go on at 5:30? I think we
Yeah, yeah,
did.
yeah. You went on
Yeah,
5:30, and then I came in and joined you at 6. Yeah, because
yeah, that sounds
I
right.
was also the
And
PD, so I'm there from like 5:30 in the morning until 6 o'clock at night. Every day. I was like, that's crazy. Yeah,
yeah, no, it worked great. So there I am without any of my supporting group, thinking, okay, I don't have any notes. I don't have any messages. I don't have anything. About 8:30, studio door opens and somebody sticks their head in and said, "You're probably wondering what the heck's going on here." And I said, "Well, pretty much." And he said, "Well, thanks for just keeping the show on this morning. And as soon as you get off the air, come back to the office and we'll talk because we want to work out a new contract with you." So, well, you know what? Thumbs up because everything works out, right? Um,
yeah.
if you recall, you and I had an opportunity to continue Rogers and Holiday show in another market, which I don't need to mention. If you do, that's fine. And for personal reasons, I couldn't. From my previous marriage, I have two children, and I just didn't feel that I could leave the Detroit market at that time. So I stayed with Viacom, and it ended up being a 9 year run for me at Light FM. So
Hmm.
in retrospect, they grew up, they moved out, and you and I could have been rocking our show still.
It's, I guess, another lesson for if you're watching this and you're in radio right now. And because radio right now is, man, it's pretty cutthroat right at the moment, where whole swaths of people are getting blown out. Um, having, and when I was talking to Bill Lee about this, we had sort of the same similar conversation because Bill got fired a whole bunch of times, but each time the next place was sort of better. You know what I mean? Because it
Yeah,
forces you to start doing things. Like when I got fired there, I had to start doing thinking of what are you doing? And if you're a jock right now, you should be kind of maybe thinking the same thing. I looked around and go, I could work at some of these other radio stations, but I'm not really a good fit for their formats. Trying to be realistic, I'm just going to be a so and so at these other radio stations. I need to kind of look to other markets where I'm exactly what they're looking for and what they need, and I can do some damage to the market and all that sort of stuff. So that's what I did, and then when I went to Cincinnati, we have a bunch of stations here. We'd like you to go to KNBR, News Talk Sports leaning, and I was like, I don't know anything about that. What else you got? It was like, well, we have the Cincinnati station, warm if you want to do that. Yeah, that'd be great, and then we work it all out, and then from there went to Toronto, GM, blah blah blah, National PD. None of that would have happened had I not got fired. We would
Right.
have just went on doing
Right.
mornings and probably gotten a little bit older, and then somebody comes along like right now, or maybe 10 years ago, and they go, "You're out," and then you're too old to really go anywhere and start over, and you're screwed. So you really, it's not a bad thing. It's actually not a bad thing to get fired. And I know my advice to anybody, probably yours too, at this moment, if you're in radio at the moment, is to have zero allegiance to the company. You're going to be professional. You should be nice. You
Yes.
should not be a jerk, and all of that stuff. And but there's no allegiance to you, and there shouldn't be any allegiance. I don't think back to the company unless you for sure see it coming at you.
Yeah.
Which yeah, I was lucky. I had that in Toronto because the owner and the president of the company, the first GM when I was a PD, you could clearly see he actually cared about his people and all of that sort of stuff. So it's like a two-way street. Hey, he's coming this way, I'm going that way. But man, that's rare. That's super rare. Wow, we got off on a tangent, but I think, I'm going to leave that in because I think it's also a good time to make a transition. So in 1996, you do something that, how old would you have been in 1996, roughly? Just, give me a
Let's
ballpark.
see. I would have been 49 years old.
Wow.
49.
So this is when I mentioned really earlier at the beginning, I mentioned inspiring. This is inspiring to me. So Eddie is 49 years old. He decides after a great career and probably could keep right on going for no problem. I'm going to bail out and I'm going to make a career change and do something else. Tell me what's running through your head because I'm like flabbergasted that someone would do that and admiring at the same time. It's like, that was awesome. And then we'll go through what you actually did after that, which is even more mind-boggling. Take it from there.
Well, it was pretty
A
nervy,
lot
wasn't
of
it?
pressure on you right there, right? A lot of pressure.
Well, and no pressure because you know why? It worked out. If it hadn't
Yeah.
worked out, it would be a different conversation. But it was very nervy to walk away from a 33-year career and very brave on the part of my wife of what was then only about 9 years. And we had two children by that time. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
it was it was not an easy decision. And for everybody that's thinking about some of the things we've said earlier, uh, this wasn't a thing where I walked away with no job, although technically I didn't have a job job to go to. We referred to a little bit of the beat on beat dance party mixing and things like that. I had built a pretty solid base of income from a series of dance parties and not just kind of playing weddings or something like that. I think we did over 100 parties per year for almost 20 years with that little company of ours. And that gave me the opportunity to change careers, go back to school, get a new degree, and not have a job because I was fortunate enough to have put together that what had been outside money for the radio jobs to excuse me to be my support during this change. So went back to school, got an MBA, and the short version is Ford Motor Company came through to recruit at Michigan State University, where I was, go green, and hired me into Ford Motor Company. And 22 years later, September of 2022, I retired from Ford Motor Company with a second career. And one of the good things about Ford, there was no boredom, as there's no boredom in radio. And I had the opportunity to start at an entry level, which is as a manufacturer's representative to dealerships in the marketing and sales area. And then I was able to grow it from there into some more important positions and make my retirement affordable now.
Yeah. So where did you start? Like, just to jump ahead a tad, Eddie ended up working in the Ford World headquarter building on I've got Michigan Avenue, in Detroit, in Dearborn, Michigan, actually. So that's where that building you ended up in. Did you start in that building too, or was it some other little place
Well,
off in the sticks?
actually, there were a lot of outlying, and still are, a lot of outlying buildings in Dearborn, Michigan,
Sure, big company.
surrounding.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the Detroit Regional Sales Office, which is who hired me in initially, was located in one of those smaller office buildings. So I was in Dearborn, but not in the big house or the glass house, or we
Hmm.
had another important one, the global marketing building we call the Blue Lagoon. Uh, I didn't start there. I started out on the road 4 nights a week. I had a company car in northern Michigan, calling on these small dealerships in northern Michigan and convincing them to take more Ford Motor Company product than probably they actually needed. But then I came back and helped them sell those, and made a lot of dealership friends along the
Hmm.
way as I grew my Ford career.
It comes to mind, you're 49 years old when you're doing this and you're starting a new career, and well, actually, probably at this point, now it's after you've got your degree. So you're even a little bit older than that, probably, right? I
Yes,
would
I was over
assume.
50. I was over
Yeah.
50. In fact, I think I was 52, excuse me, or perhaps just had my 53rd birthday.
Wow. So you're 53, and you're recruited, by Ford, which is remarkable to me that they would actually do that. To
Yeah,
take somebody that old.
yes,
Did you
yes.
ever have a conversation with anybody along the way, or maybe the recruiter or the first person you went to work for, of why they did that? Because I mean, that's a pretty ballsy move on Ford's part. Also, really, I mean, you have all the dominoes falling exactly where they need to be.
Yeah.
I don't think that would happen in this day and age now. Somebody hire a 53-year-old just really starting out a career. They go, nah, we want somebody younger for the long haul, all that sort of stuff. Any conversation why they did that?
There were conversations. I didn't know about those conversations because they were obviously behind my back, but they had a career weekend or something where employers from all kinds of companies came in. The ones that were willing, like Procter and Gamble, Hormel, and Ford, those were the three companies of all the ones. And it's a pretty long list that I interviewed with, that would be interested in somebody who is a career changer and who's 50 if he's a day, as somebody said to me. Um, but Ford was open. I found out after I hired in to Ford, because, I've loved cars and trucks and been a gearhead my whole life.
Hmm.
It seemed natural to me. And when I got there, the regional manager of the Detroit region gave me the story that his recruiting representative, who was the operations manager, came back the day that he met me and said, "You are not going to believe this. We just ran into a guy at Michigan State's MBA program and I think he's the first one I heard say he's 50 if he's a day." And of course, I was a little older than 50. And we've passed him on to the next level. And the regional manager said, "What do you mean? We have a model here. We have a model of hiring and how we bring in our field sales and marketing people. What are you thinking?" He said, "I'm thinking that he's going to make it through. And if he doesn't, because there were a lot of steps that you had to pass through, including a lot of electronic testing. There were other role play levels. It's called an assessment center that were pretty heavy duty, but they did have that question." And when I did make it through, ended up getting into the Detroit region, the regional manager shared those stories with me, that the conversation they had behind the scenes. But to your point, um, as with any job, Ford is not perfect. I worked at great radio stations. They were not perfect. There are no
Hmm.
perfect jobs,
No.
including Ford Motor Company, but they gave me an opportunity that was amazing against all odds. And I did my best to deliver for them for 22 years.
Yeah, which is remarkable. And that's a career in itself. In
Yeah.
addition to the 33, the other career in radio. And
Geez,
just
I'm old.
Yeah, no, it's not an old thing. It's I just find it super crazy, great for me. I always like it when friends get ahead. I don't know. I just think it's neat,
I appreciate
and
that.
do something remarkable. So for the people, and then we'll sort of close this baby out. But for people, just to see how far you did, move through from the point of he's this guy's like 50. What are we doing to the end? Explain your position for the last bunch of years that you finally retired from in Ford as do the impossible, sort of.
Yeah, yeah. You had
Go ahead and
to.
boast. Take the shot. Come on,
No,
just a
no,
little bit.
I'm gonna play it down a little bit, but the success is in the longevity, I would say. But I retired as the manager of global communication and implementation strategy. Uh, Kind of a lengthy sort of title. I don't know who came up with it, but it was pretty important as a conduit from the company to our dealers about how to use the Ford systems and how we communicated all of our programs and systems to our dealers. Um, and it's something as a Ford employee, uh, sadly, I think some Ford managers have never sat across the table from a dealer in northern Michigan that maybe has two customers come in 3 days and understand what they're doing to make their business work and stay in business, to coming into the company and being in a decision making position without that context. And I
Hmm.
think that's something that I was able to bring with me because some of the managers, especially those hired into Ford from other corporations that were in other businesses, not the automotive world, had not had that experience. So I think my affinity for the dealers, with the clear knowledge and understanding that if the dealers are successful, Ford Motor Company is successful.
For sure.
Um, so that's how I got through a lot of the steps. Brand manager, district sales manager, I can't remember all of them. North American field order scheduling manager, a lot of different steps, but it's just work. And you know what? You may end up cutting this out too. I hope you don't. Uh, because we are friends, we've been friends a long time, known each other a long time. The man here who's doing this interview or conversation today is teaching a lot about how to be a program director. I can tell you that he was an excellent program director, and I had a lot of radio experience with program directors who were not. He was one of them. And he was also a great friend. And I won't bore them and read the recommendation you wrote for me for Northwestern University outside of Chicago, the number one marketing university MBA program, I guess anywhere, but certainly in the US. I didn't choose to leave my kids and go to school there, but I was accepted. And I think one of the driving things was the great things that Pat Holliday said about his longtime friend. And yeah, he's a good guy. He knows what he's talking about, and he'll give you great pointers. And hopefully, these interviews and conversations have been a little bit of fun along the way, too.
Definitely fun talking to you. Embarrassing now for me, right at the last thing, but yeah. Thank you, I really appreciate it. And it's 50 years. It's been a wicked 50 years. It's been awesome all the way. Yeah, and and for everybody watching right now, it's, particularly again if you're younger, starting out in the business, or you're in the business right now and you don't have all the time like we did in there, you know. Sucks to be you. You didn't have all the crazy times. Sorry, bummer. Hopefully you got something out of this. And and Eddie's story, as I mentioned, to me is pretty inspiring. And maybe at some point you might want to think, given the way the business is going, you might want to think at some point of setting up for something on the side in case you get part of the layoffs or something. Always good to have some backup. Anyway, thank you, Eddie. I really appreciate it. Super
Thank you.
appreciate it. Eddie Rogers, hope you like this. Hope you like everything that's been going on in the channel. We're getting really, really close to 1,000 subscribers. If you have not subscribed yet, really appreciate it. We're only 20 subscribers, which is mind-boggling to me. I never thought we'd get anywhere close to it. 20 subscribers away from 1,000 subscribers, 1,000 PDs and radio people watching this channel every single week. So, I really appreciate that. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. I would also appreciate that. Until the next time, see ya.
It was fun.